child of God, your story is not done. If you are not dead, then God is not done.
Faith in Jesus Christ is the key to having a well-lit life, even in a dark world.
Salvation is something that God owes to none of us. He offers it to all of us. And if we reject that, that's first and foremost on us, not him.
God became one of us.
God is so gracious. There are times in which he will not only let you read the Bible, but he will let the Bible read you.
The same power that brought him out of the grave brought you out of the grave too.
He's looking for those who actually believe him. That's who he's going to use to change the world.
What would it feel like to stand in front of your Creator? God, teach us how to marvel again. Teach us to be fascinated with the good news of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, we are so excited about this resource that we are providing through Right Now Media, and if you have not checked that out, we really want to encourage you to check that out. There's information in your bulletin, on our website, just about how you can get signed up for that. It just has a plethora of information for you to do personal Bible study, but also to use with your groups. Maybe it's with a men's group, or maybe it's with a women's group, or maybe it's just you and another person that you do accountability with. So many amazing tools, and we just want to offer that to all of you and to anyone that you know. I mean, we're covering the cost for that, so there's no cost at all for you. As we, this year in 2025, we really want to be focused on growing deeper in our faith and in community with one another. I mean, that really is our focus for this year. Well, talking about focusing in our growth, this coming week, we're going to be starting in 21 days of prayer. In fact, it starts tomorrow. If you have not picked up your book, we have books available. We're asking at this point just one per family. You know, maybe as we get into next week and beyond, there'll be more available. But we just want to make sure everyone has one of these available to them. Pick it up. There's actually a reading guide in here so you know where to start. Tomorrow, February 3rd, is our start date on this, and we're going to be working all the way through. Next Sunday, I'm actually going to do a message that is going to correlate in with the first week's reading and prayer, and so that will be true over the next 3 weeks. The week after you've gone through the daily readings and the prayer time, I'm going to be focusing on that in the message following. So you'll want to stay up to date with us, and there's information as to how you can also stay engaged. There's a flyer in your bulletin. We're going to have 2 prayer times on Wednesdays during the 21 days. For those of you who are early risers, you like to get up early, and or you need to go to work early, we're going to gather here at main campus at 6 o'clock, and we will have you on the road by 6:35, 6:40. And so if you need to hit the road, earlier than 7, that's the plan, 35, 40 minutes. We're going to gather in the fellowship hall here at main campus. And so we'd love to have you join us those mornings. Nobody else will be here but me, I don't think. So the 2 doors I'm going to unlock are door I and door B. And so just if you want to make your way through to the fellowship hall on Wednesday mornings. And then we also do have 2 Wednesday evening gatherings at 7 o'clock for prayer as well. And so we want to encourage you to engage in that. Just want to give you another little update. Kind of as the weeks fell, we didn't, because the month of January ended this last week, and on Friday, we didn't have a final calculation, so we wanted to come with you and just say, hey, there's one more opportunity, and today is the day. Today's the day that we need to complete this. We have a year-end project that we do every year during the months of December and January, and we usually pick just what we believe are God-sized goals and dreams and what He's asking us as a church to step into. And we cover several different areas. One One of the main areas that we cover is we highly valuing our kids and our students in summer camps. And summer camps just continue to get more and more expensive every year that we do them, just because of rising costs. And so we want anyone and everyone to have that experience as a child or a student. And so we've come along over the last several years and just said, let's help maximize by overriding and lowering the entire cost across the board for every child, every student that goes, so that we can maximize the number of students and children that will be able to go. And so through this year-end project, we provide partial scholarships for those who need them. We cover some of the transportation costs, because transportation costs are just through the roof, and lowering the overall cost of the camp. So if we do not meet this goal, that is one of the things that hangs in the balance. We wouldn't be able to help lower the cost as much as we would like to. The second area is interns, and each summer we bring on ministry interns. They're students that are in ministry training in colleges and campuses, and they're just sensing this call to ministry. We bring them in, and we work with them over the summer months, and we give them experience, like on the ground, digging in the dirt type experience in ministry. And we've seen just phenomenal things. Ben, who was leading worship in the worship center today, he has been a ministry intern for 2 years for us, and we're just excited about continuing to see that partnership and his growth along the way. We've seen such a huge reward in our internships that this year we wanted to take a step out and go to that next level of saying, hey, we want a ministry resident, somebody who is finishing their ministry training in college, and we want to invite them into day-to-day ministry training, on the ground, fingers in everything type of training just to help them. And so Rylan is that person for us this year, where he is we're engaging him in all sorts of different areas, focused main focus in our middle school ministry, but Rylan is that. And so part of the year-end project monies goes to support those two efforts. Then we also have commitments that we've made to some local and global outreach, one of those being Forgotten Children Worldwide in their HIV care in India, where there are HIV-infected women who are really deemed cursed. I mean, they are cursed by society, they're set aside, and we want to partner with FCW in providing care and support and discipleship of these women who most often are also taking care of their own children, and yet they're ostracized, they're kind of shut out from the rest of their community. We also are partnering a little further with Helping Hands through Mom Time Support, and there are moms that gather every week, and we want to come alongside them to help underwrite that cost for them in 2025 and that funding for that program. We also have a school in Mexico that we want to help with a bricks and mortar type project. It's going and helping finishing a school. We have 2 teams that will be going, one here just in a few weeks and then another going this summer. This does not cover their costs. I mean, each person is responsible for their own costs. This is the bricks and mortar. We want to help provide and help this project get finished, completed, so that when our teams are there working on finishing the project up, we are helping supply the needs for that. And this is a wonderful opportunity we have through World Gospel Mission. And so each team member is responsible, again, for their travel. With prayer and a step forward, we believed, because we were at 107,000 plus last year that came in, we believed that God was asking us to just stretch a little, not a lot. I mean, we've already come really close, but to set the goal at $110,000 for this year-end project. And if you haven't given yet, today is the final day for you to do that. You can put it in your offering. You can send it through electronically. You just choose YEP. You can write that on your check. Currently, the reason that I'm talking about it, we are $26,000 under meeting that goal of $110,000. And so the situation that puts us in is, who do we have to say no to? Because we can't fund everything that we've asked, that we've kind of committed to. So who do we underfund? Who do we say no to? And we truly believe that God was asking us to do this. So I have full belief, because I know that God asked us to do this. I have full belief that the money is in your pockets to finish this, okay? And so I'm just putting that out there. I want to ask you to consider, through prayer, giving above and beyond your regular giving. We don't want you just to shift it over. That doesn't help us overall. But what is God asking you to stretch above and beyond to trust Him in? And I believe that God is asking us to do that. Well, will you pray with me? Father, I thank you for this opportunity to be able to come before you for these different needs. And Father, we know that you are the giver of all great things and good gifts. And so, Father, in our time today, I pray that you would meet us as we focus on marriage. Father, I also pray for those that were affected by the tragic airplane crash that happened this last week, and all the lives that were lost. I pray that you would continue to be with those families in the midst of what they are dealing with. Father, we know that you are calling us forward, and today we rest in you. We trust in you. It's in your name. Everybody said. Well, welcome to Hope Church. We are so thankful that you are here. We are one church that meets in multiple locations. And so if you are joining us from North Campus today, we are so excited that you are here with us today. If you are joining us from the Family Life Center, thank you for being a part of what God is doing here at Hope. Maybe you are traveling, maybe you are in much warmer climate, maybe you're at home and you're just under the weather. We want to welcome you into the service today as we wrap up this series on refocusing the different areas that God has called us into. And so through these weeks, what we have done is we have focused on this whole idea of saying, okay, we need to be a little bit more focused in this area, kind of taken the idea of manually focusing a camera, and we need to refocus in between shots, in between things, and say, okay, what is the focus that we need for this? And today, we're going to be a little bit more focused on faith and relationships. And today, what we're going to talk about is this whole idea of dissatisfaction in our relationships. Dissatisfaction is sometimes that thing that we wrestle with, especially when it comes into marriage relationships. Today, we have 28 couples that have spent this weekend engaged in investing in their marriages through our annual marriage retreat. And just amazing how God works this all out, because I had scheduled this message several months ago before I even knew of the schedule for the marriage retreat. So if you skipped out on the marriage retreat, guess what? You're going to get to hear about marriage today. And so that's what we're going to talk about, is marriage. And so if you're here and you're single and you're like, well, I'm not married, I can check out. Don't check out, because you may be married at some point. And these things are important for you. You may get into a relationship, and this is important for you. You know, students, if you're in the room, you know, you may be thinking, hey, you know what? I mean, that's way off. Well, you're preparing now. So these things are important in your relationships. Many of us know the story of David. We talked about David a few weeks ago in with his son Solomon. I want to back up just for a moment today and talk about David. We know he grew up, he killed Goliath, he was anointed to be the next king. And when David was in his 30s, I mean, he started his own family. He was still continuing to go to war like kings do. But it was early in his 40s that David committed what many believe is his greatest failure. And that was his adulterous affair with Bathsheba. In 2 Samuel chapter 11, here's what we read, and I think this is important for us to gather. In the springtime when kings go off to war, that right there sets the stage. David sent his commanding officer and his entire army off to war. What did David do? He stayed home. At a time when all kings go to war, he made a decision to do something differently and to stay at home. And I want you to get this. In this moment, when David was supposed to be in the midst of his calling, in the midst of his duty, in the midst of his design and his purpose, he chose another option. He chose not to go to war. He chose to stay home. Many times, when things break down in our family and in our relationships, in our marriages, it's because we're not paying attention to our calling and to our design. We're doing another option. We're choosing a different option. We're choosing something else. One evening, while David was at home in his castle, he got up and he walked around the roof. Looking down, he saw a woman bathing. Now remember, this was a season where David is at the peak of his career. I mean, he is at the peak of his influence. He is at the peak of his wealth. I mean, he has everything he needs in life. And yet David was still dissatisfied. He was still dissatisfied. And the thing that we need to understand and pay attention to in this story is because it's possible that some of us keep thinking, if I had what David had, I would not be dissatisfied. If I had everything that I wanted, I would not be dissatisfied. And sometimes we buy into this lie that if we only had what they had, or if we only had what we really wanted or what I really wanted, then I would be satisfied. But the truth is, we wouldn't. David had everything. And yet he was still dissatisfied. He wanted another option. He had it all. But dissatisfaction was hanging in the wings. And the story continues. He has his attendants go and check out who this beautiful woman is, and then he invites her through them to his castle, and he commits adultery, and then adding insult to injury because she got pregnant and he wanted to cover everything up. He had her husband murdered. And you have the cascading effect, trying to cover one sin, then there's another and another, and that's usually how it works. Can I just summarize David's story? It's simply this. David acted as if he had options. He acted as if he had options. David's choices reflected a deeper issue that started long before him. It began in the Garden of Eden when humanity first turned away from God's design because they wanted options. To see this, we're going to turn into Genesis chapter 3, and we're going to see how the story of dissatisfaction started and how it impacts us today. I mean, the truth about dissatisfaction is not just theory, but they're deeply rooted and they're deeply personal. In fact, Carla and I have experienced these levels of dissatisfaction in our marriage relationship. And we've walked through seasons of struggle and difficulty. In all honesty, there were some seasons where it was just plain hard. Our marriage has known words, sleepless nights, battles of the will, disappointment, discouragement, heartbreak, more often on Carla's part than my part because of things that I haven't done or should have done or all of that. You get it, right? And yet through all of it, we have chosen to fight for our marriage. When we come into Genesis chapter 3, we read that God created man and woman in his image. And together, they reflect his nature and were given equal responsibility to steward creation. One wasn't given more responsibility than the other to steward creation. They were united. They were working side by side as partners in God's mission. God gave them everything good to enjoy in the garden, but there was one boundary. Do not eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. One thing, God said, don't touch, or you will surely die. But what happened? They wanted options. Like, oh, this is an option. And we can't have this option. And then there's the voice that begins to speak and the whispers and the lies that begin to speak. And what they chose was they chose to go outside of the boundaries of God's design and his purpose. And together, I want you to understand, together they sinned against God. It wasn't one person's fault more than the other. They sinned against God together, and they sinned against themselves and each other in that choice. But this brokenness isn't just a story about Adam and Eve. In reality, we live with this decision, this choice every single day. It affects our relationships, our work, our desires, our hearts. It distorts all of God's original design within us. And for women, their role as equal partners and supportive companions was overshadowed by tension and discord. We read this in verse 16. Speaking of the woman, you will desire to control your husbands, but he will rule over you. Because of the fall, a struggle for control and independence has caused relational tension for generations between men and women. This was never part of God's original design or his original plan. It is a distortion that was brought on by the fall, the bite of the apple. And it has paved the way for a long history of inequality and struggle in relationships between men and women. For men, work, which was intended to be fulfilling, became a source of struggle and often an escape because of the struggle in the relationship. Verse 17 speaks to this. The ground is cursed because of you. All your life you will struggle to scratch a living from it. Many men respond to this by overexerting control or emotionally disconnecting or leaving their wives feeling unseen and unloved because of this. This was never a part of God's design. It was never a part of God's plan for marriage. And it has created this cycle of conflict that is only deepened when we rely on our own strength instead of relying on him. So let me frame these thoughts in several what-if statements. What if, in the fall, men sought independence from their Creator, laying down their role of servant leadership under God and to their family, only to bring about dissatisfaction in their marriage? What if, in the fall, women sought independence from their Creator, their husband, and their role, and instead of satisfaction, ended up living with a more profound dissatisfaction? What if at the core, this dissatisfaction is like a hole in a bucket that no relationship, no amount of work, and no earthly accomplishment could ever fill? Coupled with that, what if we are terribly dissatisfied with our marriage because we expected marriage to fill the hole in that bucket and to fix it? What if we keep thinking that marriage is supposed to be an amusement park? I like this illustration. I like this thought, this visual. What if we keep thinking that marriage is supposed to be an amusement park and it's all fun? But we forget that in an amusement park, the rides are 1 minute, and the lines are well over an hour for that 1 minute. What if marriage has all these long lines, which means lots of waiting and touring on the way to the thrill ride that only lasts a minute? And what if after the thrill is gone, marriage is about deeper love that grows out of bringing our dissatisfaction to God and not to each other? What if it was focused to God instead of dumping it on our spouses? What if this core dissatisfaction is really the result of a fall that stems all the way back from Eve, and it goes all the way through women, generation after generation after generation, and to the wives in this room and each of our venues today, and including my wife, Carla? What if? It's been passed down from generation to generation. And it comes into our marriage. What if this core dissatisfaction is really a result of the fall that stems all the way from Adam, that goes through every generation of men, all the way down to the husbands in this room, and even to me. And then it comes into our marriage. Think about that for a moment. The heart of the matter is this. God's original design was broken in the garden. It was broken. But here's the good news. We often tend to forget that God has a plan to redeem it and to restore it. And that design of redemption is listed for us in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 21. Here it is. Brokenness in the garden. Paul comes on the scene and says, this is what it looks like. Redeemed. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. You know what the picture is? It's mutual submission, one to the other, where a wife respects her husband and the husband loves her wife as his wife as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. It literally says, submit to one another. It isn't one over the other. It's submit to one another, mutual submission. Carla to Mark, Mark to Carla. Why? Out of reverence for Christ. And it goes on, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. And wives, respect your husbands. When we step back into God's original design for marriage, men embrace servant leadership, prioritizing spiritual, emotional, and physical well-being of their wives and their families. Women find freedom in mutual submission and respect and partnership, no longer battling for control or validation through independence. And yet, our world today struggles against that. Why? Because of the fall. And it stems all the way back into the brokenness of the garden because of sin. Can I just remind us that if we don't get a handle on this dissatisfaction, the losses will be great. And they are great. We see it every day around us. Often that loss is seen in the divorce rate. Do you know that there's hardly any difference between the divorce rate of those who are non-believers to believers? I mean, it's very minimal, the difference. That's sad, folks. It's heartbreaking. If you don't deal with this dissatisfaction and you end the relationship because of dissatisfaction, guess what? You pack all that dissatisfaction up and you think you're fixing it when you go to the next relationship or the next marriage, but you've got a bunch of dissatisfaction that you're going to unpack. And it's going to look different. And the next time it's going to be more volatile. Just telling you. I've been doing this for a while. Here's the point. Every marriage knows seasons or cycles of dissatisfaction. This is true of every single marriage. You talk to anybody that's been married for more than 5 years, they're going to tell you this. You talk to anybody that's been married for 40 plus years, they're going to tell you this. There's cycles of dissatisfaction. But not every marriage knows how to mature through dissatisfaction. So let me get a little personal here. From a very young age, many women are conditioned by culture to dream of Prince Charming. Here he is to save the day, riding his big white horse, in, and Prince Charming comes in, and someone who's going to meet every physical, emotional, spiritual need. They're like, oh, I'm just waiting for my Prince Charming. That longing is carried into adulthood, And it's often fueled by romance stories and idealistic movies where the man is both heroic and endlessly romantic. Like he just hits it off. I mean, you know the Hallmark movies, you know those movies. I mean, how many of you watch those movies? You're like, oh, like my Prince Charming. Riding in on a horse to save the day, like here he comes to save the day. What about men? We're often shaped by different fantasies. You know, society creates unrealistic ideals for us as well. Often it's through pornography. It's also through movies and shows. And those ideas are formed in us, and there's the comparisons and the fantasies that no person, let me say this again, no person can ever fulfill. They can't. And here's the problem. Both of these fantasies set us up for disappointment. Both of them. Women may feel frustrated when their husbands don't meet their emotional needs or forget the little things, and then the little things pile on the little thing, and all of a sudden it's like, you know. Men may withdraw emotionally, and they're like, oh, I can't do this, and we create distance. And we're like, I'm going to go do a hobby, and I'm just going to disappear. Like, I'm going to be over here. But I'm over here. And we go into our little corner or into our little own box. And we stay there, disconnecting, because we can't live up to the imagined ideas. And there's failure on both points, and it leads to disappointment. Let's just get honest. Neither men nor women were ever meant to live up to those fantasies. We were never meant to. That's not God's ideal for us. We weren't designed to fulfill every need of our mates. And there's a reason that movies end often after a wedding with the words, and they lived happily ever after. You know why they never show the next? It's because life happens. Life happens. Marriage is messy and it takes work, and it's not about living out a fantasy. It's about learning how to mature together in dissatisfaction and realizing that the dissatisfaction can only be met in our relationship with Christ. Even when our marriage doesn't feel perfect, we know that we serve the one and we love the one who's redeemed us by grace in his perfection. And so here's the question. Are you expecting your spouse to fill a role that only God can fill? Let me share just some cautions to men and women for a moment. Guys, we tend to find our identity wrapped up in work, and it has a way of owning us. Because, you know, we feel like we have to be the provider, and maybe that's where we feel like we're respected, and so we wrap ourselves up in that. And if we're not careful, it can create this environment where we can detach from our marriage, detach from our family, detach from our kids, and what we really don't understand is that we're dealing with dissatisfaction at the core. And so when we feel the pressure, we come home and we carry the pressure, but then we spread the pressure around. And our family feels the weight of the dissatisfaction and the pressure that we carry. And we go like, well, here's a little bit of my dissatisfaction, and here's a little bit of my dissatisfaction, here's a little bit of my dissatisfaction, and we spread it all around equally. And then we go hide. And so here's one thing we can do. Guys, be cautious not to hang out too often with other guys who agree and buy into and support our tendency to fall into these traps of work and disconnectedness and join in wife bashing. There's way too much of that, men. Walk away from it. Because that doesn't serve the two of you together as husband and wife. Genesis 3 also teaches us where we find our self-worth. He teaches us where we're broken and how we try to find it in the wrong places. And then some words of caution to the women. And I know I'm stepping on dangerous territory here, but I'm going to go anyhow, okay? You can't find your self-worth in your husband or in a man, because your husbands can't fulfill all of your needs. They can't fulfill your deepest needs and longings. He was never created or designed to meet your deepest need. And it's unfair to put that on him. You should be looking to God for that. He's the only one that can meet that. Another caution: resist the urge to try to control your husband or try to change him from who God has created him to be. But love him. And just as I said to the men, you have to be careful about gathering together with other women who bash their husbands and talk about them and complain about them. That does not help your marriage. It only sows seeds of discord and frustration. You see, God's design for marriage is about husbands and wives becoming a we and not staying divided as his and hers. It's about a we. We should always be moving forward together. And when we learn to do this, we can begin to fill each other's needs the way we need to be filled. Because men, when we are present and we are leading in servant leadership, and women, when you are respecting and honoring, it begins to fulfill the needs that we have in each other that we can meet. And when we look to God to fill what only God can do, those greater needs are met by him. Can I just tell you that Carl and I, after 40 years of marriage, we're still learning this rhythm. We have in no way perfected it. But it continues to change us and continues to grow us. It doesn't mean that we don't have issues. We have issues. Just sit with Carla. She'll tell you all the issues about me, okay? I'm not touching anything with Carla. She's amazing. God has given me an amazing gift in her. She puts up with me. Let me share a couple of statements. Marriage maturity starts and sustains with a no options approach. No options approach. Because optional thinking leads to optional living. Just like we started with David. Optional thinking means I have options. I can do other things. If you have an option to emotionally detach, or you have an option to have an adulterous affair, or if there is an option of divorce, you are just creating a world that says, I can run away from all of this. And it's only going to feed your dissatisfaction because you have options. You have to determine and commit together that you're not going to have any options, because how it plays out practically is when you're dissatisfied, you tend to think and compare the strengths of somebody else to the weaknesses of your spouse. And nobody can win that comparison. Nobody. Here's all I'm going to say. You haven't lived with them yet. That's the only difference, because there's going to be challenges, dissatisfactions. Carl and I have vowed that we would never live with options, that we would never introduce the thought or the idea that it would be better without the other. And we've never formed or thought or said the D word. If you are using the D word, divorce, in your conversations or entertaining that in your relationships, that is going to propel you forward towards that. The enemy wants to use that, to speak that over you. A commitment to no options doesn't come easily. But it's something that we have learned as we've continued to love one another. And I want to challenge you to think about that for your own relationships. What would it look like for you to bring your dissatisfaction to God alone. Instead of letting it drive a wedge between you and your spouse. What if? Because here's the truth. If your dissatisfaction is not rooted, it will uproot your marriage. If it's not rooted in John chapter 15, where Jesus comes in and he talks about, I am the vine and you are the branches. If a man or a woman remains in me, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. He gave us the key to thriving relationships. It's being connected to him. If we're going to have growth in our marriage and our relationship, our roots have to be deep into him. It's simple, but yet it's profound. Here's what I want you to remember. When we stop expecting our spouse to fill the deepest needs of our heart, and instead we shift to God to meet the deepest parts of our heart, it sets apart disappointment. And as we deepen in our relationship with him, it begins to look like this. The more and more I pursue Christ, I pursue my relationship with God, to the same degree in which I pursue that, each one of us, we come closer and closer together in our relationship. So what's the key? Deeply rooted in him, together, so that you can be closer and closer to each other. Carla and I have seen this happen in our relationship for 40 plus years. As long as we are rooted in him, we're going to keep growing. The moment we become disconnected, it's just like a cut flower. It begins to die as soon as it's cut off. So here's my challenge to you. Admit that you are broken. Together, come to grips with the dissatisfaction and heap that on God, not on each other. Realizing he's the only one that can meet your deepest needs. Don't allow those dissatisfactions to begin to grow into bitterness or division, but instead heap it on him and commit to growing together with him so that you get closer and closer and closer together. I want to invite you to make a public statement today in all venues. I'm going to pray. If you want to make a commitment in your marriage to no other options, you can stand together where you're at as I pray. If you want to come and lay it on the altar, if you're struggling in your relationship and you want to make a no other options commitment today, you can do that by praying together at the altar. You can do that by praying together wherever you are. But if you're committed to no other options in your relationship, in your marriage, will you stand with me as we pray? Father God, you see the commitment. Father God, I know you also see our brokenness. I'll be the first to confess that I am broken, that we are broken, Carla is broken. And yet we're beautiful together. We're beautifully broken together. And Father, I pray that throughout our church, that couples, marriages, that we would understand and commit to no other options, but that we would be beautifully broken together. And that we would pursue you above all in these relationships. Father, I pray that you would restore marriages, that you would restore relationships, that you would take what has been burned and is ashes, that you would restore life from the ashes again. We know you can do this, God. And so we commit in your name. And everybody said, amen.